Hello and good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me this morning. I am going to today be you with a lecture on Astronism, specifically the mystical tradition of Astronism, which is something that I have alluded to in previous lectures as part of the original Astronist lecture series, but I've not yet done a full lecture on Astral Mysticism or the Astronist mystical tradition, as it may also be referred to. And so obviously today the title of our lecture is Astral Mysticism and the Journey to Astrosis. What Astrosis actually means, we're going to get into. We're going to be exploring what mysticism in terms of the astronomical world means, and how we are able to gain these higher states of being that are able to fulfill the scope, the opportunities that we have been afforded in this life. So I'm really excited today to be providing you with this lecture, and let's begin. So the contents of this presentation will mainly center around the cultivating of one's relationship, one's personal relationship with the cosmos, as a means of attaining mystical ascents, mystical heights, mystical conditions. And essentially, this refers to the entire tradition of mystical activity that takes place within Astronism, which is called Astrosis. So you may see me hear me say that word quite a few times, Astrosis, or Astrocism, sorry. That is the tradition of mystical activity within Astronism. So we're going to be exploring all of that. And then we'll also be looking at the nature, functions, and dimensions of Astrosis. So why we need to be gaining Astrosis and why we need to be trying to attain this condition, and why also we need to try and help other people do it as well, because how that relates then to collective Astrosis, which is what we call transcension, and also how Astrosis relates to the universal cosmosis at the end of our lives and the end of the universe, of course. So beginning with Astrocism and what that means, essentially, as I've said, it is the Astronist mystical tradition. Every belief system, every philosophy, and most religions, of course, have a ideal for what they want for their followers. They have an ideal for life. They have a higher condition that they discuss and talk about, and Astronism is no different in this regard. And the tradition that of mystical ascent that we're talking about in Astronism is what we call Astrosis. And essentially, Astrocism is therefore the spiritual, mystical, and intellectual union with the cosmos. This is what Astrocism wishes to achieve with regards to Astrosis. So Astrosis is the spiritual, mystical, and intellectual union with the cosmos, and Astrocism is the tradition of methods that help us to achieve this condition. So essentially then, Astrocism or Astrosis denotes absorption into the astronomical world through the use of various practices and by cultivating astronality and stellancy. Astronality and stellancy are confirmants that are regarded as either merited, so things that we, sort of conditions, attributes that we achieve through our actions and what we do, or unmerited. So these are conditions that are afforded to us by the fact of our evolution. So astronality generally is what we refer to as an unmerited conferment. There are merited aspects of astronality, gaining higher conditions of astronality require merit, but on the whole, it actually is a unmerited conferment. Astronality, it is there within us, and I'm going to get into what astronality means and what how we can better ourselves, better our astronalities as we go through our lives towards the end or in the middle of this lecture. So Engaging us in Astrocism then means to achieve the ultimate of limitation. So in Astronism, we ascribe to the cosmological principle of limitationism, which is that the entire cosmos that we live within, and all of our lives, and even the great galaxies and stars and everything like that in the astronomical world and the terrestrial world, everything is limited by its nature. Everything comes to an end, and everything has also a physical limitation in terms of how large it can grow before it collapses. And so we take this sort of limitation principle and apply that to ourselves as well as individuals. And we say that we only really, as individual humans, have, a finite amount of ability, a finite amount of capability, really, to achieve what we wish to achieve. And so this ultimation or ultimate of limitation is astrosis. This is the highest condition that we're able to achieve. And so what astronists should be, especially those who engage in mystical aspects of astronism, what they should really be trying to achieve is this ultimate condition of a limited existence. Essentially what that means beyond the cosmos is that divine elements, of course, have no limitation. Universal elements have infinite capacities, whereas we here in the cosmos as cosmic entities only have a limited capacity, and we can see that all around us. It's a fact of our existence that we are limited beings, but also that the Earth is a limited entity, that the galaxy is a limited entity, that the whole cosmos eventually it had a beginning and it will have an end. So even the cosmos itself is limited by its own nature. So yes, essentially that's what Astrocism is trying to achieve. It's trying to achieve this ultimate of limitation. And this is what we regard to be a status achieved through extensive astral contemplation. This is because we regard the astronomical world as the existential source. So in Astronism, the astronomical world, meaning outer space as a whole, is regarded as, in a way, higher than we are, which is a physical fact, of course, but also in a way existentially higher, ontologically higher than ourselves. And essentially, by engaging with the astronomical world, by engaging with this environment that is so beyond what we could even at this stage live in or exist in, engaging with that on a spiritual level, on a intellectual level, and also, especially with regards to astronauts, on a physical level, will then help us to achieve this higher condition, this higher state of being that I'm talking about. And we do that through, obviously, astral contemplation and all the different practices that make up astronism. That's why we have these practices, in order to get people to achieve this state of astrocism that we want them to achieve, this ultimate condition of their limited selves. This also, another aspect is self-surrender to humanity's destiny and the subsumption unto the astronomical world. These ideas will come about as we go further through the lecture, but essentially what I'm saying there is that humanity has a destiny to explore the astronomical world. Will you and I as individuals be able to see that? Maybe not, because it's going to take maybe hundreds, thousands of years to achieve, but we can play a role in that, and we can contribute to humanity's destiny, and we can contribute to the endeavor of space exploration and the endeavor of what we call transcension. We can contribute to that. We can contribute to that achievement. And this is all we ask for in astronism. We're not asking for people to become anything than what they can already become, if you know what I mean. That we're not asking people to conduct miracles here. What we are asking them to do, though, is try and contribute to the transcensional endeavor, the endeavor into the astronomical world, not just physically, but also philosophically, spiritually, intellectually, emotionally. And then subsumption into the astronomical world is a really interesting concept that we're going to come to hopefully a little bit later on. And essentially, again, this really subsumption in a non-astronist context refers to, in a way, a kind of absorption, this full absorption into the astronomical world in all aspects of life, bringing the astronomical into one's life. I feel that I am, still trying to do this, but I have achieved this to some degree. Bringing a cosmocentric worldview is really important in that. Thinking cosmocentrically, acting cosmocentrically, believing cosmocentrically. These are all aspects and ways of subsuming into the astronomical world. So these are just a couple of overviews, really, of what I'm talking about in terms of this sort of broader tradition of mystical ascents in Astronism. So officially, Astrocism was the first aspect of Astronism that emerged post-omnidoxically. This was the first aspect of, even though aspects of the omnidoxy inferred to this tradition of mystical activity, there was no actual specific reference to Astrocism in the omnidoxy. So it was one of the first to emerge after the omnidoxy was written. And it goes by a multitude of names: Astral Mysticism, Astronist Mysticism, Astral Mysticism. I won't read out them all, but there's quite a few names for this tradition within Astronism. And so that as well, I think, demonstrates its importance, really. There is an important part of the Astronist religion that focuses on this mystical side. And it is connected to the soteriology, and it's also connected to Astronist eschatology, as we will see later on in this presentation. So what are the fundamentals of Astrosis then, or Astrocism? That the cosmos holds a plethora of spiritual and intellectual mysteries. These are what we call astronomical elixirs. These really could be any type of substance or event or phenomena that exists in the astronomical world that we as humans at this current stage are not able to engage with, or that we are not able to yet having discovered, but they are discoverable. And so the discovery and exploration of these astronomical elixirs is regarded as key to the ultimate absorption with the astronomical world. Of course, I mean, an example of an astronomical elixir that is sometimes given is the fact that on other planets, there could be plants, well, there will be plants that have evolved differently from our own, and maybe we could use those plants to as medicines to cure illnesses here that we haven't yet been able to cure, because we don't have the properties to be able to do that. So that's just one example of what an astronomical elixir may be. An astronomical elixir may also be something like just going past Jupiter in a spacecraft and being able to see that planet in all of its entirety when you're actually right there in front of it. And that could be an astronomical elixir, in the sense that you are having this perspective that no other person has yet been able to have. And Frank White, who's an author of the Cosma hypothesis in the last couple of years, he coined the term overview effect, which is this dramatic change in perception that some astronauts feel when they have been up into outer space. And that could be regarded as an astronomical elixir. So the definition is fairly broad for what an astronomical elixir could be, but what it has to be is it has to be in outer space. An astronomical elixir can't exist on a terrestrial, well, on the Earth. It can't exist on the Earth. It has to be out of reach of humanity at this current stage that we're talking about, and it has to really kind of change humanity in some way. Mainly a physical object, but also, as I've just explained, it could also be a more perceptional type of activity, viewing something that no one else has viewed or been able to view in the past. So this absorption that I'm talking about is regarded as one part of the broader destiny of humanity. So in Astronism, we talk about the humanic exploration of the cosmos as sort of the destined, it's a conception of space exploration, but it infuses the concept of destiny into it. And it really relates space exploration to individual humans, but also humanity as a whole. And so this absorption into the astronomical world that I'm talking about, whether that be on an intellectual level, a spiritual, or a physical level, this is all part of this destined activity, this destined endeavor of humanity to explore outer space. So as I've put there on the third bullet point, we just talked about astronomical elixirs. The concept of astronomical elixir comes from a re-theorized form of alchemy, which is what we call cosmic alchemy in Astronism, and in which beliefs, ideas, and methods of astrosis are compared, mixed, and rearranged. So cosmic alchemy is really about trying to discover either a physical object, mainly physical objects, but as I've said, a perception or an abstract idea, mixing those together, comparing them, and really trying to decide whether they are integral to achieving astrosis or good ways for achieving astrosis in comparison to others. Astrocism involves the adoption of practices and the experience of astral ecstasies as a means to cultivate and master one's astronality, and as a result, one's stellancy. So astral ecstasies in this regard refer to experiences that are induced really through subsumption into the astronomical world, absorption or subsumption into the astronomical world. These are very personal experiences. I've had these experiences since I was 15 years old, and a lot of them have come together to form, the omnidoxy and everything that happened with regards to the composition of the omnidoxy. My astral ecstasies, which were very personal experiences to me, formed the omnidoxy to some degree. And I've spoken to people as well who have experienced similar ecstasies, not too far removed from sort of religious ecstasies, where people have visions of God, or people become into union with some type of deity. For me, an astral ecstasy is coming into union with the astronomical world and really sort of galvanizing that really strong bond between myself and the night sky of stars and beyond that as well. So astral ecstasies are not experienced by every person. Whether they can be induced is, another thing, is another question to ask for maybe for another day. But I've experienced astral ecstasies and they weren't induced. I didn't really particularly do anything to induce them, although more recently I've experienced them and I feel that they were more induced, really, that through my sort of meditative practices under the stars, that I was able to really induce an astral ecstasy. So maybe there's two different types of astral ecstasies, one that are induced and one that are more spontaneous and naturally occurring rather than actively sought out, if you understand what I'm saying. So astral mysticism. Well, what does astral mysticism mean? It's it is synonymous with astrocism, so it can be used synonymously with the term astrocism, but more specifically it refers to the coming together or union of the mind, body and soul, possibly soul, of human beings with the astronomical world through proximation, which is what we call stellancy. Stellancy is one's proximation to the astronomical world. So in much of astral mysticism and astrocism, the goal is to increase one's stellancy to the highest degree that it can be done, proximating oneself to the cosmos is kind of the goal really of astral mysticism or astronist mysticism. So stellancy is really important in that regard. And then experience and acknowledgement, mainly experience, emotional experience of the astronomical world, is what we call astronality. This is a person's emotional attachment to the night sky, and this can have multiple levels. And also part of obviously our mystical union is that emotional side and that psychological side. That's really, really important to grasp and understand and try and cultivate that. So essentially it denotes the astronist endeavor to achieve astrosis, therefore. So coming together or union with the cosmos means approximating oneself with the astronomical world, meaning stellancy. And then also you can do that through emotional experience of the astronomical world, which is what we call astronality, and then also acknowledgement of the astronomical world. And this all comes together to achieve what we call astrosis. The next bullet point down, which is what we call asabasis or asabasis, is also called the astrotic journey or ascent to the overworld, is a mystical, intellectual or physical journey into the astronomical world. I feel that I'm on or have had astrotic journeys where, you know, visions of the astronomical world have appeared to me. Of course, these aren't physical, but they are certainly emotional, and they are certainly to some degree spiritual, and also to some degree physical, in the sense that I've had, during my astral ecstasies, I've had this sort of physical ascent to the astronomical world. That was not a physical body, but more of a spiritual ascent, but that actually I was actually in outer space. This is just the experience that I had, and I know a couple of other people who've had that type of experience where they've actually felt that they were in outer space, that they felt that they were much closer to a lot of these astronomical phenomena than what they actually were, but they really did feel like that when they were experiencing this type of ecstatic experience, for want of a better word. So asabatism is the total receptions and indices experienced during an asabasis and the resulting beliefs, concepts and practices. So asabatism is a lot of what emerged in the omnidoxy. So not all of it, but some of it is what emerged in the omnidoxy. So my ascents to the astronomical world and my experiences on an ecstatic level resulted in me then being able to have these ideations and indices that then allowed me to really express a lot of my beliefs and experiences through the omnidoxy. And that's what the final bullet point there is really talking about. But I'm not alone. You know, anyone could do this. I believe. I think anyone. I'm not special in that regard. I think anyone could have. And I know other people who have had astral ecstasies or kinds of astral ecstasies or ascents to the astronomical world in a mystical way. You know, anyone could have those types of experiences and then write down their receptions and indices thereafter. I don't think I'm any special in that regard. It just so happens that I've put my experiences down in a book and formalized that into Astronism, into what Astronism's become. But in order to achieve Astrosis, anyone could really do this. Whether that is able to be induced, as I said, is another question. Can astral ecstasies be induced? I believe to some degree that they can. I believe to some degree that they can, because through astral meditation, meditating under the night sky, and really getting to that state of being that is so proximate to the astronomical world, achieving that state of being would definitely, to me, induce some type of ecstatic visions and ecstatic experiences. So we've talked a lot about this word astrosis, and it seems to be the central aspect really of astrocism, and that's correct. Astrization is the process, therefore, by which a person achieves astrosis. Determining who has achieved astrosis is still a very, very difficult task to be able to do. Myself, I believe I've achieved a degree of astrosis, but I don't believe yet, because I'm only 22 years old, so I feel like I've got a whole lifetime still to be able to achieve more or higher astrosises. So I wouldn't want to say that I've achieved astrosis in a way, because I've got the rest of my life to maybe improve my stellancy and improve my astronalities even more. So, whether I've even achieved astrosis is a question, but an unsanctioned astrosis is one that is not verified by the institution. Part of the institution's responsibilities, the Astronist Institution that is to verify whether people have achieved this state of being. It's not... I don't want people to misread this and say that if the institution says you've not achieved astrosis, then you haven't. It's just that and that's what we would call an unsanctioned astrosis, one where a person believes that they've achieved their ultimate condition that they could do. They've made use of all the scope that they've been afforded during their lives. But that just maybe they haven't formally received any type of recognition for that from the institution at this stage. That's all that means, really. And of course, astrosis, and this is really, really interesting, seems to have occurred throughout history in some very interesting writings from people throughout the ages, where they've discussed the stars at a higher level than perhaps what some astronomers and scientists of how they discuss the stars. Marcus Manilius is one who I believe his understanding of the astronomical world at 2,000 years ago, through his writings, he seemed to have a very profound connection to the stars, and although he saw the astronomical world in a very astrological way, so not in an astronistic way, I do believe that he certainly achieved some degree of astrosis. An astrosis that is regarded, therefore, to have occurred prior to the founding of Astronism is what we call a Proto-Astrosys. So this is an astrosis that has occurred without the practices of Astronism having been engaged with, because obviously before Astronism was founded, these people couldn't possibly have engaged with Astronist practices at all. So I do think there are people throughout history, and part of some of the work that I want to do is try and look through some great authors and poets and philosophers who've written about the cosmos, and try to decipher whether they have achieved astrosis or not, and try and use some of their great writings to be able to to help people in the contemporary try and achieve this state of being. So yeah, a person who has achieved what we call proto-astrosis is what we call an etherist. And as I've written there on the second bullet point, Marcus Manilius is considered as one of an etherist, a person who he was a Roman poet, and he wrote the poem Astronomica, which is now available in sort of a book format, and it's a brilliant read. And I do suggest anyone who's interested in astronism to really go and read that, even though it's astrological in nature. I do think there's a lot of astronistic ideas in there as well. So in my exploration of this sort of higher condition of the self with regards to the astronomical world, I then began to consider, well, if someone like Marcus Manilius could have achieved Astrosis, 2000 years ago, who was then the first person to achieve Astrosis? And this is the question that has led me to discuss and develop what we call the scope of man doctrine, and really going back to the origins of the astronic tradition itself, and the origins of religion itself. So the first Astrosis is considered to have been achieved sometime after the scope of man, but has really been being connected to the concept of the scope of man, which was really the ignition of the relationship between humanity and the astronomical world. And it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, humans couldn't have achieved Astrosis before they first looked up at the night sky and considered it with philosophical or religious ideas. So, and that's what the scope of man refers to. So the first Astrosis must have occurred after the scope of man for humanity to have engaged with the astronomical world in that way. On the fourth bullet point here, we've got what we call hypercosmism or deep astronism. This is a really interesting aspect of the tradition of Astrosis and Astrocism. And it's essentially the belief that there may be an infinite amount of dimensions to Astrosis. I mean, if we are achieving ultimate conditions of the limitation, could Astrosis be achieved on a universal or divine level? This is a question that astrotheology tries to perhaps address to some degree, and also, an unlimited degree of ways that Astrosis may be achieved. If we engage on divine levels or theological levels with Astrosis or the astronomical world, are there then unlimited ways that Astrosis may be achieved? This is a question we have to consider. The concept, finally, of universe within denotes the notion that exploration and contemplation on the nature of oneself is key to one's achievement of Astrosis. So in a lot of traditions, possibly New Age traditions, that astronism is very much distinct from and not part of, there is this concept, though, of the idea that the higher condition of the self really has to be achieved from within oneself. And this is something that astronism really pushes back on with its concept of and worldview of cosmocentrism. The idea that, no, it's not within ourselves that we must look, it's towards the astronomical world that we need to look for this ultimate condition, if you will. But there does exist this concept of universe within, or cosmos within, in astronism, and this is kind of relating to the concept that maybe Astrosis can be achieved by looking within oneself first, and then after that engaging with the astronomical world. And this does make sense to some degree. I mean, if you yourself aren't healthy and able to engage with the astronomical world because of your own internal conflicts and your own internal misunderstandings and misconceptions of the world around you, then you really need to fix that first. You really need to fix your internal self before you can then engage with the grandness that is the astronomical world. That's what that concept is really trying to highlight for a certain proportion of people, not for everyone, of course. So practices within Astrocism are vary greatly. We've got Astration, which is proximation to the astronomical world. Of course, this can take place on a spiritual, physical or intellectual level. Astration, obviously, the goal of Astration is to improve stellancy, which is a person's degree of proximation to the astronomical world. Astration is the actual enacting of that proximation. We've also got Parsonism, which is the practice of meditating while listening to cosmically themed music. I love to do this. This is a really great practice for some people who really enjoy listening to music, but also, you know, they also want that meditative aspect as well. Some people don't like silent astronism, and I do understand why they don't. So silent astronism is where essentially under a night sky, you really quiet the world around you. You get away from music and all of the distractions, and you literally just look up at the night sky or close your eyes and really feel the astronomical world, really feel it like you've never felt it before. That's what silent astronism is. So it's a little bit different from Parsonism. Parsonist traditions infuse the use of music into meditation. So that's another practice that a person may wish to do. We've got prostellation, which is one's mystical raising to the stars. This is kind of what I was talking about before when I was saying that I went on, for me, you know, a very personal experience of ascent to the astronomical world during my astral ecstasies. This is what I was talking about, a raising to the stars in a way. I felt raised up in a way that I've never really felt before. I'd never felt before, and I only rarely still feel that since, really. To people who felt that, it's an absolutely life-changing experience. Functions of this or sort of derivations of this include astral dispositions, which is where you sort of feel your moods swing according to the visibility of the stars. I have this. This is one of my dispositions. I have to admit that I certainly have an astral disposition. If the clouds have been covered the night sky for a week, my mood is affected by that. And it may seem weird to some people, but that is true. I need that exposition to the astronomical world to really improve my mood, and my moods do and are in sync really with the astronomical world and how it functions and whether it's visible or not, whether I'm able to engage with that or not. This is what I call a derivation or a product of experience of prostellation. And there's also lots of other things, you know, experiencing indices, seeing apparitions, which is what I talked about earlier. These are more astronomical apparitions, not apparitions of persons per se. These are more specific to seeing astronomical phenomena that are not physically there, but you see them and you see them as though they are there. And what that means for you as an individual is something that you have to explore. And hopefully Astronism provides the tools for you to do that. That is why Astronism has been founded, in order to provide people with the guidance to do this. Soterial rejuvenation, of course, you know, at the moment going into sotheriums isn't available at the moment for the vast majority of astronists, because at the moment we're just not at the stage where we can start building sotheriums. But sotherium rejuvenation can be conducted at even secular astronomical laboratories, observatories and planetariums. You know, it doesn't have to be an astronist sotherium in order to do sotherial rejuvenation, especially at this stage in the development of astronism. Maybe in 100 years time, you know, we might have more sotheriums, I hope, that are more geared towards obviously astronism and manifesting astronist beliefs and practices in the world. But at the moment, we're limited to secular observatories and planetariums. But you can still get that same therapy from it and that same rejuvenation. We've also got astral channeling, which is a really interesting idea of the ability to interact with what we call the Astran force. This is more in transstellationist school rather than the naturalistic school. But again, if you are more of a spiritual conviction, if you believe in the spirit and if you want to engage spiritually with the astronomical world, this is the way that you do it. You channel the Astran force, and this allows the impartation of knowledge and truths about existence, human nature, and destiny, as well as other fundamental topics like salvation, both personal and collective salvation. So they're just an overview, just a couple, five different practices there that within Astrocism are very, very important to its practice. We've got 5 more practices here that we can look through. We've got astral exposition, which kind of what I've just spoken about with astral disposition, which is exposition to the outer space and really how that affects our mental powers and physical healing and well-being. Astronation really is the consideration of space flight and space exploration as having religious and philosophical benefits. Astrocination, which really involves going to dark sites and engaging with meditative practices and praying, or just simply being in silence, which is something I really do enjoy to do. Just literally sitting under a night sky and being silent is probably one of the best ways really to engage with the astronomical world on the levels that we're talking about in this presentation. We've got autocosmia as well, which is the possession of one's soul by the cosmos. Again, more we see the transstellationist school here rather than the naturalistic school of thought. And then you've also got the cosmic meditation practice, which I've spoken about variously already in this presentation, which is also, of course, key to Astrocism. Now we come to a really interesting idea in terms of the 5 senses. In my theories of Astrocism and sort of more generally engagement with the astronomical world, I looked at developing or applying what we call the 5 senses of the terrestrial world and applying those to the cosmos. And you can actually do that through touch, taste, sight, smell, and hearing. Of course, the main one for us at the moment is sight. But for astronauts, it could be touch. You know, actually physically being in the astronomical world is certainly an abstractic experience. Hearing as well is also a very, very interesting one. Hearing, of course, we have to rely on astronomical observations for this type of activity, but I think as time goes on and as we explore the cosmos even more, these other types of engagements with the astronomical world will be able to take place. But at the moment, obviously, most of us are limited to just sight. Don't know how taste would take place yet, but astrotonic, I thought I should develop that. I don't know how tasting the astronomical world, perhaps tasting space food may be a way of engaging with the astronomical world in that regard, but we'll have to see. That's just, you know, I thought I had to create that because taste obviously is a key sense, but that will probably have to be sometime in the future rather than now. These are just some other aspects of the Astronist mystical tradition. We've got Cosmatra. This is really actually quite important, really. Cosmatra is the collection of signs that a person has achieved Astrosis. And these can either be physical signs, intellectual or transcendental or spiritual signs that a person has achieved Astrosis. And this, like I was saying before, the Astronist Institution, part of its responsibilities is to decide or to sanction whether a person has achieved Astrosis. And so these are the types of signs that they will be looking for. Unfortunately, in this presentation, I don't have enough time to go through all of the different signs that there are, but I've just given you there the main 3 categories. If you want to take a look at some of the signs that we would look for, you can do so through, I'm sure online or in one of the books certainly within the institutional dictionary, I would have thought there would be some explanation of the specific signs that we would look for. Cosmic remediation, which is the belief that the practice of meditation supports the resolution of psychological conditions. This is really, really interesting. Part of astropsychology is trying to see how, and the bottom bullet point there as well, iatroastralism, which is the tradition, really the assertion that the exposition of a sick person to the night sky really has a physical and mental well-being impact, and this, I think, definitely needs to be developed more. I think that as time goes on, it will be developed more. I think it's coming soon. I really do. I've seen people engaging in this way more, because we do have the tradition of eco-psychology, which is where exposition to nature and animals is considered to have a mental and physical well-being for the person. So why not as well have there be a astropsychology, which looks at, exposition to the night sky as really having profound, I think, psychological benefits, and hopefully trying to help people in their psychological conditions. Cosmism, which is the belief that it is humanity's destiny to return from that which we came, which means the astronomical world. This is really, really central to not only Astrosis, but the whole of Astronism, really. Cosmism is really central. This idea that we must return to the place from which we came is really, really central concept. And this is what Astrosis is trying to achieve. It's trying to achieve this proximation to the place that we came from originally, that the place that human life or life itself came from. We've also got Cosmosis Restoration, which is the belief that upon accepting one's fate as becoming one with the cosmos, that a person will be mentally and physically cured of all fears of the inadequacy of their soul in being judged by God, as in taught in other religions. This is a really interesting concept in terms of just accepting that one day, after, of course, as part of a person's death, they will become reunited with the cosmos. The acceptance of that, I think, has profound, as I've said there, mental and spiritual effects that I think that can really help a person. That acceptance, rather than feeling worried and fear that the whole life is going to be judged, or that they could go to hell. No, the cosmos accepts all, and cosmosis occurs to all. That doesn't mean that you can, act unethically during your life, but it does mean that you will become one with the cosmos either way, and that the cosmos, but also at the same time that you will cease to exist after, and this is very much a naturalistic perspective, in terms of this sort of disregards the concept that cosmosis really encompasses a much broader set of steps that are more spiritual in nature. So they're just another couple of aspects of astrocism that exist, just to give you a flavor, really, that there exists a much broader, really, aspect to this tradition than just Astrosis itself. There also exists currents within Astronism. I've referred to before silent Astronism, the third one down there, the simple practice of silence with regards to the astronomical world. We've got renditionalism, which is the use of physical objects to try and improve one's stellancy, improve one's proximation to the astronomical world. That's really, really important to some people. Sanationism, which is the belief that witnessing astronomical phenomena leads to improvements in a person's stellancy and in a person's physical and mental well-being. Astrata, Astrodora, Astrotantrism, all these aspects are all currents within Astronism, or Astrocism, sorry, that really are trying to attain astrosis, but they've got their own ways of doing it in a way. These are all methods to achieve astrosis that are being provided, that are being suggested. A person doesn't have to engage with all of these to attain astrosis, but they can choose essentially which way they feel is best for them. So the study of Astrosism is what we call sidereology, and this is a really important aspect of the broader study of Astronism. Sidereology is therefore the study of Astrosis, how Astrosis is to be achieved, the different methods of Astrosis and how they are to be engaged with, and how they can be, in a way, developed. You know, a lot of these methods that I've spoke about today do require more development. These are still very, very fresh, new ideas and interpretations of engagement with the astronomical world. This will all need to be developed more as we go on, as astronomism develops more. A Siderian, therefore, is an astronist mystic, and also the study and mastery of astrosis or astrocism is a central component of an astronist's daily life. It should be, and also their overall life purpose and journey. You know, being an astronist means to approximate oneself to the astronomical world to the best of a person's ability and scope, their opportunity to do so. And so, you know, part of an astronist's daily life, but also their life in general, their life journey, is being able to do this and engaging with astrocism and the mystical aspects of astronism. That's very, very important to an astronist's life purpose in many regards. I've spoken quite a little bit about astronality up to now, but I've not actually gone sort of a deep dive into what that actually means. Essentially, astronality emerged out of my development of astronic tradition, really, because I realized that since the Stone Age, humans have been sort of having an emotional connection to the stars and the astronomical world that essentially has existed since our evolution began, really, into intelligence, into intelligent beings. And so essentially what astronality therefore is sort of a mixture, really, of wonderment, self-reflection, existential meaning, and also fear and happiness as part of a person's observation of the astronomical world. Astronality is considered, as I've said there, to possess spiritual aspects, physical, and intellectual components, all independent of each other. A person can engage with astronality spiritually one day, and then can engage with it physically or intellectually another day. And they don't have to intermingle. They can be independent or they can be intermingled. It's up to them. It's up to that individual. There's no person saying that that can't happen, if you understand what I'm saying. Of course, as well, there are other individuals who are engaged with this topic. There is psychologist William E. Kelly, who I really, really admire. He's done a lot of work in the area of Noct Calador, which is very similar to astronality. It is used interchangeably. Within astronism, though, we do make a distinction between the two. But essentially, yeah, Noct Calador refers to a person's connection to the night sky. And this sort of connection or psychological experience is really fundamental to astronism itself. I don't really think astronism could have developed any further without really this emotional attachment to the night sky. That's what astronism is in many ways. And so therefore, understanding, you know, the truths to existence really through astronism is engaging with a person's astronality. Engaging with that also therefore means achieving astrosis. Achieving the mastery of astronality is astrosis itself. And as I just mentioned before, you know, we can trace this aspect of the human psyche back to the Upper Paleolithic period of the Stone Age, some 40,000 years ago. And really, that then is also intertwined with the concept or doctrine of the scope of man and the origins of the astronic tradition and the origins of humanity and religion itself. So astronality, of course, is a very, very important experience, central to Astronism and also central to the achievement of Astrosis. Of course, as well, another important word is what we call stellancy. I have defined this a little bit earlier on as the proximation of the person, of the self, to the astronomical world. The extent, and essentially what this means is this sort of proximation aspect is the degree to which a person is in tune with the cosmos and its activities. Again, both on an emotional, physical, spiritual, and intellectual levels, but also in relation to the individual or to humanity as a whole. The heightening of a person's stellancy is the ongoing life goal of all astronists, or should be the ongoing life goal of all astronists. This is the whole point of Astronism, is to proximate the self, but Astronism provides, hopefully, a good guide in order to do that. That's the whole point of Astronism. And a person's stellancy can fluctuate as well throughout their lives. This is not something that is constant throughout a person's life. My stellancy has fluctuated already during my life. Some days I feel really, really close to the astronomical world, really, really close to Astronism, really, really close to the goals and activities of space exploration. And then other days I don't feel as close to it. I don't feel as proximate to the astronomical world. And again, sometimes that is because I've not been exposed to the astronomical world for a few days. You know, I live here in Lancashire, England, and sometimes, you know, we have some very cloudy days and very cloudy nights, of course. And that really does affect me sometimes, the degree to which, you know, I'm able to engage with stellancy or improve my stellancy. Sometimes really just depends on the weather. as funny as that sounds, sometimes it really does, because again, we're engaging with a real physical environment here that has physical obstacles to our sight. Sometimes as well, I mean, there are other things you can do. I mean, if you do live in a place that is very, very cloudy, or even if you live in a city as well, I've spoken to some astronists who live in cities, and they say that, you know, they really either can't afford to leave the city, or they, you know, they are engaging with, they find it difficult to engage with the astronomical world because of light pollution. Well, there are other ways you can do that. You know, you can watch documentaries on the stars, on space exploration, or you could read an astronist book or a similar space related book. You don't always have to have that real natural physical approximation in that way. You can have a more intellectual way. But again, there's nothing like that natural. If anyone hasn't visited a dark site, and who hasn't yet before seen sort of the beauty and the glory of the astronomical world without any light pollution or very little light pollution, you must do it, because it really will change your life, really. And you may experience things, you may have experiences and engagements with astronality and stellancy that you haven't had previous. So how does this all then relate to the Astronist eschatology? It really does relate, because Astronist eschatology, of course, refers to the final destiny of humankind. And so what we're really talking about here, and this is why sort of the life goals that I said before for astronists should involve astrosis and sort of this approximation to the astronomical world, is because the destiny of humanity is intertwined with this, and also perhaps the destiny of the soul is intertwined with these activities. As I've said there, in Astronism, rather than events regarding death and destiny occurring in relation to an invisible realm like heaven, the literal astronomical world is considered to be centrally involved in such topics. And so therefore, we need to approximate ourselves to the astronomical world, because that it plays this fundamental role in death and the afterlife, and death and the final destiny of humankind. Of course, as I've spoken about, cosmosis is the union of the body and, depending on one's school of thought, the soul with the cosmos upon death, while astrosis, which is what Astrocism wants to achieve, or is helping people to achieve, is this same union, but during one's lifetime. So cosmosis is after a person has died, whereas astrosis is during their lifetime. And so, you know, these two halves really of the same coin are intertwined, certainly, and they're also intertwined with the destiny of humanity as a whole. If we as individuals don't achieve astrosis, how on earth can humanity achieve transcension, which of course then relates to Astro Soteriology and humanity's attainment of salvation. As I've alluded to, there are two major schools of thought in Astronist eschatology, what we call astronaturalism and also transstellationism. From the titles, you may be able to gather that astronaturalism asserts naturalist view of the world, so it denies the concept of the spirit or soul, which really in a way doesn't take away that much from what Astronism is trying to assert. I mean, we still have you know, our physical bodies and our physical approximations to the astronomical world, even if we don't have the spiritual side. So really, I think what astronaturalism does is it takes away the spiritual aspects, but it also raises more questions in terms of, and in a way more, it raises kind of more urgency, because in the transstellationist school, because there is a concept of a kind of an afterlife, or a kind of post-corporeal existence, where astrosis may be then achieved and cosmosis may then occur, because that exists in transstellationism, there is more, not to say that there's less urgency in transstellationism, but there is more opportunity in transstellationism. There's a post-corporeal opportunity, whereas in astronaturalism, there's only this life to be able to do what we want to do in terms of space exploration and astrosis. There's only this life to do it. So there is more urgency with regards to astronaturalism. So it's very, very interesting, the application of a naturalistic worldview on astronism, specifically astrosis. It really brings about more urgency. Transstellation, on the other hand, as I've just referred, asserts supernaturalism, and it asserts that the soul exists and that the soul really is intertwined with this idea of astrosis, and that a person's soul also becomes united with the cosmos, not just their physical selves or their intellectual or emotional selves. So there's a whole other tradition there. So you've got these two schools of thought, and then of course you've got which are, you know, taking different perspectives on this same topic. Myself, I, you know, engage with transstellationism quite a lot. I do engage with that quite a lot, and I would say that at the moment I'm engaged with the transstellationism school the most, and I do know a lot of astronaturalists, and they're great people, don't get me wrong, but at the moment I'm very much interested in engaging with the transstellationist school of thought and exploring that to its greatest depths. But again, this again, I think, shows that because there's two schools of thought, this shows that there's a great deal of variety within astronism to engage with the concepts that we're talking about here. We've also got Astro Soteriology, which is, again, very much connected to the concept of astrosis and the attainment of this mystical union with the astronomical world. But what Astro Soteriology introduces is the concept of salvation, or what we call, may also refer to as transcension, is what we would mainly refer to it as. So Astro Soteriology is the doctrine of salvation as it pertains to space exploration. So it's essentially saying that space exploration and also a person's unity with the astronomical world is the way to salvation, is the way to achieving transcension for all humanity, not just individuals. And again, in Astronism, humanity is seen as one of many intelligent species to populate the cosmos, a species, however, that is fundamentally limited by its entrapment upon the Earth. We've spoken again earlier on in this lecture about limitationism and the limited nature of humanity. This is all as we regard it in this astrosoteriology. It's here. We are a species that is limited. We are a species that is in a way trapped upon the Earth. And deep space exploration is considered the destiny and salvation of humanity in this regard. We have to be able to, for want of a better word, escape the Earth in order to really fulfill our destiny, but also to reach higher conditions. How else are we going to do that if we're just on the Earth forever? And we're not going to be able to do it, is the answer. We're not going to be able to do that. If we stay here and don't continue to progress upwards, we're not going to be able to achieve higher conditions, higher ways of being. The form of redemption that we talk about in Astronism is what we call transcension, and that redemption is achieved by way of physical ascension, which is obviously the physical exploration of space, but also collective knowledge accumulation. So the more knowledge we have, the better we will be in achieving transcension, and the individual mastery of a person's astronality and stellancy, and which of course will then lead to astrosis. We need to achieve astrosis as individuals for humanity to achieve the collective astrosis. We can't have it where, you know, the individual astrosis has to come before the collective. There's no other way to do it. We as individuals must develop ourselves astrotically first before humanity can then develop itself astrotically. So as this lovely kind of flows into how we're talking about individual astrosis and collective astrosis. You know, individual astrosis refers to the mastery of a person's astronality on both spiritual, intellectual, and physical levels. I mean, this is again what we've been talking about throughout this entire lecture so far. The astrosis of the self by way of astronist practices and astral mysticism, like we've been speaking about. The union of the self with the cosmos during one's lifetime. This is what individual astrosis is. Whereas the collective astrosis, which is what we call transcension or salvation, we may call it, but mainly we call it transcension, is the collaboration of humanity to embark upon and achieve the endeavor of space exploration. This is what we're trying to do through collective astrosis. Through space exploration, we will then achieve collective astrosis, which will then let us achieve higher conditions as a species. Yes, like it says there, the astrosis of all humanity as a whole, the union of the whole of humanity with the cosmos. I spoke a little bit about the scope of man doctrine earlier on, but and it is a doctrine that's classified in Astronism. If you want to find out the difference between a dogma and a doctrine in Astronism, please go and take a look at that. It will be in the institutional dictionary. But yeah, the scope of man means that really is the beginning of humanity's relations with the astronomical world. Humanity's relationship with the astronomical world is what we call sideriancy. That's the word sideriancy. That's what we call it. And the scope of man is regarded as having occurred during the Upper Paleolithic of the period of the Stone Age, particularly among the Aurignacian culture. The reason why I've picked them out is because they seem to be the first culture that actually looked up at the stars and depicted something, expressed some type of emotion, which is what obviously we call astronality. They experienced astronality and then expressed that feeling through artwork, through the brilliant the brilliant rock art that you can see in the caves. And if you take a look at one of my lectures on the Astronic tradition and the origins of the Astronic tradition, you'll be able to see what I'm referring to there. Followed by the following the scope of man is the enkindlement, which is what we refer to as the bestowal of astronality as an unmerited conferment of all human beings. Right at the beginning, you might have remembered me saying that there are two different types of conferments. There are unmerited conferments and there are merited conferments. Unmerited conferments are where humanity hasn't really particularly done anything itself to attain this conferment, but it has been provided through the realities of the cosmos, you could say. And of course, this is what the enkindlement is referring to. It's referring to this bestowal of astronality. It's referring to this first experience, really, of astronality. And so therefore, the scope of man and the enkindlement are very much intertwined in that way. In this instance, scope, and this is probably the most important word in all of astronomism, is scope. Scope refers to opportunities to approximate oneself or all humanity to the astronomical world. Scope is really, really important. It's one of the most important words in all astronomism, perhaps besides just astronomism itself as a word. Scope is really, really important because it refers to those opportunities that are provided to us to approximate ourselves to the astronomical world. And of course, that is the basis of why astronomism exists. That is the basis of why or how we want to achieve astrosis. And of course, that then has huge implications for how we then engage with astronist practices throughout our lives. Other aspects of the scope of man is that humanity is regarded to be in a state of controversion from the original scope of man, in that humankind has become self-concerned and has resorted to self-worship. So the scope of man occurred sometime during the Upper Paleolithic. We've spoke about that. But then after that, what seems to have taken place is that this really pure relationship between humanity and the astronomical world seems to have been made, in a way, you could say, terrestrialized or anthropocentralized, if you want to use that word, mainly meaning that humanity has made itself the most important entity by either making itself a god, which is what we see with the Egyptian pharaohs, some of them, that used to worship the sun, but then they began to worship the pharaoh himself. And then that obviously trickled down to possibly Christianity eventually, the idea that God became man, this idea that humanity is very much intertwined with the functions of the universe as a whole, which to me seems very, very self-concerned and also a form of self-worship. And this is what we refer to as the controversion, that going away from the proximation of the astronomical world and more towards proximating on ourselves. That's how I feel that religion has taken us to. And not to say that all religion is bad in that regard, but I do believe that this original purity that existed at the scope of man, this original relationship, was really contravened by humanity's, in a way, humanity's sort of struggles really with its own insignificance in the grand scheme of the cosmos. It is the purpose and goal, therefore, of astronomism to correct this controversion through what we call the placement of man, which entails, in a series of practices and activities, including Astrosis, transcension, and ultimationism. The placement of man is really trying to essentially put humanity in its proper place in the cosmos, put humanity in a place where, in its correct place, in a way, to say that really we aren't that important. We are to some degree. We're not important, but we're not as important as perhaps some religions have made us out to be, is essentially what I'm trying to say here. And what Astronism is trying, therefore, to do is to promote astrosis, to promote proximation to the astronomical world, this highest condition of limitation, in order to get humanity to see that really it's the astronomical world that we should be putting all of our focus on in order to achieve this state of being. And as I said there, I've repeated there, scope refers to opportunities to do this proximation, to engage with this proximation. That's what scope refers to in astronism. A couple more aspects is that there were many benefits that came as a result of the scope of man, namely humankind's preferment. In this, I refer to the fact that humanity has evolved to the condition where we can understand the stars in the astronomical world, that we have the opportunities in terms of technology to physically ascend to the astronomical world, opportunities that other species haven't been afforded. So humanity is regarded to be somewhat preferred or somewhat important to some degree. But as I said, not to the degree that we focus only on ourselves. And this, again, comes all the way back to cosmocentrism, which is the Astronist worldview. The scope of man also provided us with Astronality, and it also provided us with the capacity for scope, and also provided us with our sustainment of stellancy. The fact that we are able to proximate ourselves with the astronomical world is very much intertwined with the scope of man having occurred. If the scope of man hadn't occurred, I don't think that we would have been able to, take to engage in these types of conversations and also in these types of sort of observations of the astronomical world that have taken place since the dawn of humanity, really. Humankind's path to transcension is regarded as having begun at the scope of man, but to have been derailed by the controversion, as we spoke about, but that is being put back on place or putting back on course through astronism as part of the resumption. The resumption in astronism is trying to resume these good relations that we have with the astronomical world, trying really to resume this close proximation that we have with the astronomical world. And there are variants or interpretations of the scope of man that include descoparianism, post-scoparianism, and pre-scoparianism. So there's a lot of different views of what the scope of man means, or when it occurred, or the confirmance that it brought about, and the benefits that it brought about for humanity. But essentially, that is essentially the scope of man. And I think it really is important. I hope that you've grasped that the scope of man is really fundamental to why we have to engage with Astrosis in the present day. So finally, just some concluding slides for our section 4 here. Here are some Astronist books. The one on the right-hand side is the Institutional Dictionary of Astronism, which has recently published just last month. The Concise Dictionary of Astronism was published last year. And of course, the Omnidoxy was published the year before that. So these are just, some books that you may wish to purchase that will hopefully provide an even more detail on what I've been able to cover today. You can find all those on Google. So if you just search on Google for the title, you can find those. Here are just some more of my ambitions for the future. At the moment, I am conducting my PhD research, and I've also like I've been doing here, started lecturing as well. So I'm very, very busy with that, and also working in the field of freedom of religion, human rights and religious education. Those things are really, really passionate to me and really, really important to me. I want to continue, of course, my research on astronomy and religion to further establish the theory for the Astronic tradition, because I think that the more that we understand about the Astronic tradition, the more that will really begin to inform us of what is taking place with regards to astronism in the contemporary. I really do think there's this really symbiotic relationship between the development of the Astronic tradition and our theorization of the Astronic tradition and how we see astronism and how we engage with astronism. I really think those two things are intertwined. And also, again, as we move into the establishment era, I want to gain recognition for astronism in different countries. That's a really, really important endeavor for the Astronist Institution. All of us who refer to ourselves as astronists, that is really, really important. So we've got a lot of work. I've got a lot of work to get ahead. The Astronist Institution has a lot of work ahead, but we'll get there. One really cool quote that I really like that emerged from my writing of the institutional dictionary back earlier this year was, "Up above, return again." And this is something that I've referred to earlier in this lecture called Cosmism. This basic idea that we are to return to where we came from. So up above, meaning that is the place that is the astronomical world that we must focus on, that we must put all of our efforts into understanding and engaging with, but that also we must return to it again, and that we will return to it again, both in our corporeal lives and of course in the Transtellationist school, in our post-corporeal lives. Here are just a couple of references to some of the things that I've referred to today. Through those references and resources, you will be able to find more resources if you click on those. My master's dissertation is still available for people to download and read. Hopefully I'm going to be doing some more work with the Astronic tradition later this year. But again, you know, this is available still to download. If you're interested in freedom of religion in particular, you can take a look at my doctoral research proposal. Of course, this is the work that I'm conducting at the moment in terms of my my PhD research. So that is something else that you can take a look at. And yeah, thanks everyone for listening today about astronism, specifically the Astronist mystical tradition, or what we call Astrocism. And also, of course, the journey to Astrosis that hopefully I've outlined there. There's a lot to take in, so maybe you might want to listen to this a couple of times to really understand what I'm trying to say here. But again, there's so many other resources as well that you can take a look at on astronism.org or astronism.com. You've also got Astropedia as well, which is another resource. There's loads of resources out there. Finally, please check out my video series, A Conversation with Cometan, on YouTube, which you will already be doing because this lecture is going to be one of the main episodes of season 2 of A Conversation with Cometan. And I thank you, and I will see you in my next lecture. So thanks everybody, and I will see you when I next talk about astronism. Just remember, up above, return again.